All right, here we are. 17. Sivan, Hayom Yom. 17, Bigamatria Tov. Short one, but okay, punchy. So refraining from deriving pleasure in the fullest sense from this world. Now here we have to hark back to the way we've understood this all the time in learning Tanya, right? Yeah, it doesn't mean to have displeasure from the things which are pleasurable. It means, as he's about to say, is to align that, to utilize that pleasure for, and as he's going to say. So refraining, in other words, refraining from deriving pleasure per se, that make the physical object the object of your pleasure. That itself, refraining from doing that, making the physical object the object of your pleasure, is only a fine preparation for avoida. Avoida itself is transforming the physical into a vehicle for godliness. Oinig Shabbos is a good example. There are plenty of others. He was meant to have oinig of the physical things, through the physical things. But that's for the sake of Shabbos, to bring them back and elevate them. And so the physical is, again, hugely important, maybe, not maybe, really more important than the spiritual. We're not living here to be spiritual, quote, enlightened beings. We're living here to utilize the physical so that the sparks which are inherent in it, the sparks of Kedusha, are returned to the place from whence they come, which is in the deepest levels of Kedusha. That's Hayom Yom. And we'll see how this theme, it's always interesting to try to see how this theme permeates, crosses over into the Tanya, because, you know, on the principle that you have to live with the times, the Chumash, the Tillim, the Tanya, and all of what we're learning, we should be able to find some really inherent correlation. In any case, let's see. Lessons in Tanya. 17, Sivan on top of page 897 in this edition. And in the Likutei Amorim, 17, Sivan, there's a few lines down on page 160. So I think that a little introduction might be helpful here, not just recapitulating, but a little introduction. We've been speaking about the Hiskaladus of Midos, the inter-inclusion of Midos. And we spoke about this a lot, of course, during Spiros HaOmer. And there's a lot written about this in a very enlightening, though deep, thick way in the lessons in Tanya. Lots of writings from the Rebbe about this. But one central point I think might be helpful to bring to the table, which is the difference between, Hiskalalus, which we translate in English generally as inter-inclusion, Hiskalalus, and that's the word we're going to be used here. Hiskalalus, things are inter-included. Chesed and Gevura, we're going to stay with those two, are inter-included with each other. The difference between Hiskalalus and interoperability. So I'll give you an example. Interoperability of the two mitos is something that we participate in. If a parent, a parent loves a child, we'll say that's the, and the parent wants to give love to that child, but that love cannot be given by simply an effusion of chesed. If the parent just gives and gives and gives, candy, money, property, travels and trips to the kid, that's going to spoil the kid. It's not going to develop the kind of abilities that are needed for growth and maturity of the child on his own or her own. So there needs to be an interoperability with the midah of Gevura. I mean, the classic example of this is with a baby. You want to give the baby a sweet thing, a candy, but you can't overdo it because you're going to have a lifetime of dental therapy, right? So you hold back. So these two things interoperate with each other. The scholarless is that these two things are one. they are one, as we're going to speak about them at depth in today's Tanya. And hopefully we'll get a better sense of the oneness of them. Hiskalalus belongs particularly to Hashem, that Chesed and Gevurah are a unity. So let's go on now and listen to the language of the Tanya and hopefully develop a better gefil, a better feeling for this inyan of Hiskalalus. And interesting, serendipity enough, he begins with Hiskalalus. Behine behiskalalus amidos, zu bezu. And just one more thing. We said yesterday, we brought the expression, Oilam chesed yabana. Okay, maybe that's a good example to bring to the table. An entity, which is called world, can only exist by the unification, inter-inclusion of chesed and gevurah. So it's not that it has certain characteristics by the admixture of one and the other. It's that its whole existence depends on the inter-inclusion of chesed and gevurah. So when we look at the inter-inclusion of the midos, zu bezu, as an example, it's chesed and gevurah, nir la'ayin, it appears to the ayin, to our perspective on things, that ihu v'gameh chad. And this is the perspective that the Kabbalah gives to the appearance or the presentation of Hashem in the world of Atzilus. That ihu, he, and his vessels, or lights and vessels, are one. Now again, see, in our language, we have to, in order to talk about two things, we have two words. But in the world of godliness, there is no two, there's only Hashem Echad. There's only one. So the twos become not interoperating one with another, but absorbed into a singularity. And this is the perspective in the world of Atzilus. The world, the emanated beings in Atzilus have this perspective, which is a difficult thing for us to understand, that at the same time that they are emanations and perceive themselves as emanations, at the very same time, they experience themselves as nothing separate from and only part of God himself. Because in Atzilus, Ihu, the Garmehu, which is touched in Kabbalah, his lights and his vessels are one. Shehen midoisov, and these lights and vessels are godly attributes. Because since they're in a state of complete unity, imoy, with him, therefore, they are unified, singularly brought together in a singular point, one within the other. And here's our word of Veni, kalula zubezu, and they include each other. That's their nature, to be included with each other in a singularity. Hashem Echad. Kamam Eliyahu, as saying is Eliyahu in the Zohar, the Antu, the Kosheloin, you are the one, you Hashem are the one who Kosheloin, who ties these midos together, umeyachadloin, and unifies them. Ubar minoch, and outside of you, leis yehuda be'eloi, there is no other supernal unity. Though the supernal unity itself, by definition, is a oneness of what in our perspective are two opposites, which can interoperate with each other in the metaphor of holding back the candy, but in godliness, they are a singularity. And this is what it says. And this is, by the way, he quotes again the opening of this Shar Yichud V'Emunah, right? The Shar Yichud V'Emunah says, "V'hashevotza ela bevecha," you should put upon your heart, "Hi Hashem hu ha'elakim," that God, right, which is the name Havaya Yud Kei Vav Kei, is the name Elokim. Not that Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim are combined with each other, but God in himself is the combination of Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim, of infinite flow and infinite constraint. Which he says, Pirish, meaning, Shnei Shemos Elu, these two names, Havaya and Elokim, Heim Echad Mamish. They're not a combination, they are a oneness, a singularity. Shigam Shem Elokim HaMetzamtzum Umalim HaOr, because also the name Elokim which contracts and conceals the light, hu bechinas chesed. It's not that the two combine, it is a chesed. Again, olam chesed yabana. There's no world without and only because of God's chesed. It's only God's chesed. The world is built with chesed. But at the same time, wait a minute. The world is built with chesed, but if in order for there to be a world, as we pointed out earlier, the word world means helam, olam, helam. It has to be a concealment. So in godliness, these two things are a singularity. Who and the or and the lights are one. Who bechinas chesed kamei shem havaya. So excuse me, I'm skipping a little bit here. So gam shem Elokim, back to this line. That also the name Elokim, hametzamsim u'malim ha'or, which conceals the light, who bechinas chesed, is not combining with chesed, but it is a chesed. Kamei shem havaya. So that's what I mean, havaya hu Elokim. So this answers the question, if you remember at the beginning of Shar Yichud V'Emunah, when it says that you should put in your heart that Hashem is the ein, havaya hu Elokim edo, there's no other. He asked the question, would you think that there's another God? And the answer to that is no. So what is it telling you that Havaya and Elokim, they are one? It's telling you that godliness, God himself, and the expressions of God, which we call godliness, elokus, are at root and always carrying two opposite infinities. The infinity of extension and the infinity of contraction at the same time. That's the unity of God. Because the attributes of the Holy One, blessed be He, and here we'll introduce or reintroduce the note HaKadosh. Kadosh is muvdal, separate. God is Kadosh. He's operating. I'm smiling because it's kind of a silly thing to say. God is operating at a level removed from the level of anything we can actually grasp. This singularity of opposites, as opposed to the interoperability of opposites. So, Mishum Shemidos of Shalakodesh Baruch Hu, the midos of the one who is removed on high, transcendent, all-encompassing, which is drawn down, by the way, that all-encompassing singularity into all of the world of contractedness. That's united with him with a complete unity. He and his name are one. It's not like us. The name that we have is an expression of something that's soulful and expresses something of our soul. But with Hashem, he and his name are one. There's no differentiation whatsoever. His midos are his name. If so, you should know that in the heaven above and the earth below, there is no other. There is no other, meaning there is no chesed that exists apart from Gevurah, or all the midos together. There is singularity. That from when you're talking about Hashem, that's all of those things together are a singularity. Ein od. There is nothing besides that. Pirish, as he explains, even this coarse physical world down there below, which appears to be a tangible, coarse, substantial thing, and called the way everybody sees it, the way we see it, who it is at the same time, it's absolutely nothing from the perspective of HaKodesh Baruch Hu. This is what we call Yehuda Ilah, the perspective, because I'm just saying this because it came up the other day in the class, the Yehuda Ilah, the unity from God's perspective. From God's perspective, he is the Yesh, with all of this complexity, which is not complex by him. This is another way of expressing the paradox. All of the complexity is in godliness a pashitus, a simplicity. There's no multiplicity at all. There's nothing besides him. He's the ayin, and down here is the yesh. Kihu ayin, he's the ayin, the ephes, and the something which is nothing, which means that it's a point, it's less than a point, and at the same time, whole way more than a point, which includes everything. So he ayin be'efes mamish legabi HaKodesh Baruch Hu, in relation to the Holy One, blessed be He, this down here is nothing. Hishem Elokim, because the name Elokim, which is the name that we give to characterize. See, we can only think in bifurcated manners. If it's chesed, it's not gevurah. If it's gevurah, it's not chesed, right? We can blend them. We can interoperate them. But it's very difficult, maybe impossible for us to view them as a singularity. Kishem Elokim, the name Elokim, which is a name of God, from God's perspective, Enu Marlim Umatsamsum, that doesn't conceal and contract Ella L'Tachtoinim, only from the perspective of us down here below. Shem Elokim, Shem Havayar are who he is, and not functions that he expresses. So down here, however, they become functions that he expresses. There has to be a tzimtzum in order for particularity to exist, right? And that's only l'tachtoinim, to the lower worlds down here below. But this sense of differentiation and particularization is not something that Hashem experiences, because he and his name are one. Therefore, even so, therefore, also the earth and underneath the earth, from his perspective, and ayin v'efes mamish are absolutely nothing legabi HaKodesh Baruch Hu, in relation to and from the perspective of HaKodesh Baruch Hu. Ve'ein mikrais b'shem klal, and they don't have any name at all. Afilu b'shem oid, even to call them something else, because there is nothing else besides him. So there's no oid, there's no something else. Because oid, something else, implies lashon tafel, something secondary. Excuse me. And he quotes a line now from the Gemara in Kedushin. It says, Yehuda be'oid likra. It's the Gemara, it says, and the Gemara asks the question, does a verse in the Torah require additional support from a custom in the territory of Yehuda? In other words, the territory of Yehuda. In other words, to make a ruling, do we need additional support? In other words, bring something else to the table? Yeah, in this world, we do. But for Hashem, there is no oid to bring to the table. Down here, there are secondary things, like the body, which is tafel l'neshama, right? The body has no existence. Well, it has no life without the neshama. So the body and its ability to be alive depends. It's an interdependency, right? That the body is dependent upon the soul. The body is dependent on the neshama and the life force which is within it. This is a pasuk in Tilim. Halalo Hashem, I will praise Hashem in my life, and then azamra lelaki ba'oidi, and I will. Zamra is musical instruments to Hashem with my oidi, with my something else. Just to reflect on something we said yesterday, when we were talking about the Hey Gavuras, one of the examples that we brought to the table is musical instrumentation, which is the word zimmer. Zimmer also means to prune. So it's cutting. It's associated with gevura, to cut, to prune it back. And musical instruments, in order for there to be a sound, let's say from a string, there has to be something that's vibrating back and forth. Or another example, maybe even a better example, if you're creating notes through a reed instrument or a horn, you have to contract your lips and open and close the lips through the mouthpiece or the reed itself, which has to expand or contract, bend one way or another. That's a little bit of a side, but it points out, in order to get this breath coming out into a song, the breath is the unimpeded extension of, nothing holding it back. But the song has to come from the 5 articulated powers of the mouth, which are the 5 gevuras. So these two have to interoperate in order to create music and to create sound, or even to create speech. So in the subsect, he says, I praise Hashem bechaye, with my mouth, with my life. Azamra, I will make musical instruments to God with something else, with an instrument. She'achayim Nimshachim Mishem Havaya. The highest, the life force, comes from the Shem Havaya, Yud Haveh, continual bringing into being, like the breath, like that. Ve'oid, and the additional, Shehu Aguf, which is the body. So the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Chaye is the life force, which is the soul. The soul is unimpeded life, but it gets involved, it interoperates with the body, which impedes it, but also the body is they're totally dependent on the soul to give it life. And that's the soul, the body is the Shem Elokim, and the Chayas is the Shem Havaya. This is because these are two separate things. The body is not bringing, the soul doesn't bring the body into life from nothing to something. No, these are two separate things interoperating with each other. And from that respect, we can say that down here we can model Havaya Elokim as interoperability, the uninhibited expansion, and added to it the opposite of it, which is the impeding and the holding back. But the soul is not creating the body. The Holy One, blessed be He, Hamahava es Hakol, who brings everything into existence, from nothing to something. Hakol batal b'mitzias etzlei. Everything is nullified to His existence, me'ora shemesh b'shemesh, like the light of the sun in the sun. That's today's Tanya. So I hope that has given us a little bit deeper insight into the way seemingly opposites, Chesed and Gevurah, are not just integrated and becoming interoperated with each other in Hashem, but characterize the singularity which is Hashem. I'll just say something before we open up the questions. That one of the uftus, one of the results of this, one of the benefits of this, is that infinity is always in every created thing. Infinity, even though it may manifest itself as a limited thing, a planet, a person, a body, the infinity is always there present, because Ein Od really means not that there is no other God, as we said, but there is nothing else besides Him, including every particle and every human and every planet. There is nothing else besides Him.
I didn't understand the how does Azamar Lelokai Be'odi if there is Ein Od?
No, the idea is with my stuff, with my additional stuff. I've got stuff. I've got a soul and a body. The soul is the Chayi, and the body is the Oidi. Oh. That's a parenthetical explaining that, body and soul, not Hashem. Right?
Yeah. I also thought of the five senses as the five Gevuros.
Yeah. As we said yesterday, any number is... any number in the Torah you can understand any number in the Torah and they're all related. 5 senses, 5 fingers, 5 Gevuras, etc. They're all related. Not the trick. But the next step is to understand the relationship between them, all the 5s which are related. But sometimes easy, sometimes not so easy. But yeah. Any other comments or questions? Oh, I don't know if this is Rivka Bachein or Rivka comment question, but it doesn't matter.
I think what we're learning is the unity of the person.
Rivka, you're breaking up. If you talk more slowly, it might be better.
Okay. I think what we're learning here is the unity, not just of us and Hashem, but unity within ourselves. A certain unity of body and soul.
Yeah, but that's a unity, a union of two different things. What we're learning here more, I agree with you, we are, But the point more of this particular chapter is the singularity of God, that his inter-inclusion of midos is not like our inter-inclusion, where body and soul get together. It's at root a singularity. Yeah. Anybody else? Therefore, I think Rufka, though, I think started something that we could use as a behem.
One second. If there's a unity, a total unity in Hashem, where we're included in that, why is there total?
Where everything is included in that, right? Everything, ain't owed. Yeah.
So then why isn't the body and soul also?
Then why is God, he's breaking up what? Why
isn't our body and soul total unity?
Because that's not the way that's not the way that he's created things. He's given us das takton. It appears to us that things are separate. It appears to us as things are separate.
Appearances, by appearance only.
Yeah, by appearance, there is nothing else. There is no body. There is no soul. There's only him. But once we're talking body and soul, we're talking, in other words, there's a difference between talking about God's midos and him, because hu v'shmei echad, they're one. Talking about body and soul by us is two things which interoperate together. At root of roots, there is no difference between body and soul. There's only God.
Okay, we can agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a moment? I'd like to bring something from the Baal Shem Tov to shed a perspective on this concept of hitklalalut.
Go ahead.
There's a famous saying by the Baal Shem Tov that says, the part of the whole is the whole itself. And this is a perspective, and now what we've talked about in the Tanya today is from the perspective of God's total oneness, unity, singularity. That's the only way we can refer to it. But there's
that's important that the people get this. That part of the whole is the whole itself, is God, referring to God. Any part of God is his whole, because he has no parts.
Okay, there's another way to see it that I've learned from my work. But what I was going to say, which is, maybe I'll just say it very briefly, which is, the whole is certainly God. There's only one. And the part is all of us, like the facet of a diamond, all of us people, and particularly Am Yisrael, but all of us, all of creation. And what's beautiful about the saying, as I learned it by the Baal Shem Tov, is that God's desire, let's say, or ratzon, is to be able to come into reality with his unique singular oneness and display itself through the parts, which are all of us.
That's correct.
So actually the inter-inclusion is then going in the opposite or a different, let's say, direction. It's not the direction we talked about today, but it is still inter-inclusion, where that incredible level of oneness comes through us, each of us, each face and facet of us in the world. That oneness and unity comes out in the finitude. So
it does, but it comes in the finitude, right?
Inclusion. That's also the klalalut.
Right. It's just, but it comes in a way. I'm sorry, I'm stepping on you. Go ahead, finish.
No, I just said it's another perspective of what hiklalalut is. It's maybe not talked about in this chapter, but it is definitely a perspective of a definition of hiklalalut.
Yeah, okay, but there is a difference. Would you agree that there's a difference between?
Yeah, of course, there's a difference between.
It's an interesting thing. Let me just say, it's on the one that says, "Kameha neshama malias a goof," just like the neshama fills the world, the body, so God fills the worlds, right? Mala, he fills it. So there is, without a doubt, and we have to really take this very seriously, there is an infusion of Elokus, which is the infinite, in the finite, right? What we're pointing on this chapter is, however, it looks very, chelik elokam emal is after all only a chelik. That the chelik, this is the godly soul. A chelik elokam emal. That the godly soul and everything in it is infused with the singularity of divinity, which is above particularization. That's a fact. That's the second part of what you were saying. However, at the same time, he wants us to experience ourselves as something separate. He wants us to take this world of separation and bring out the unification which is within it. But so he has an intention, his intentionality in creating things with which we do mitzvos. His intention isn't that we should meld into the allness and become nullified in our Metzius. His intention is that we should remain a Yetzias, a Yesh, and at the same time be expressive of the Ayin. That's the Rabbi always says, a Yesh ober Bittel, a Yesh ober Ayin, to take the Yesh and express, exhibit the Ayin which is within it. But as long as there's a creation, the creation, there's a thing called creation, it will experience itself as something to some degree separate. Yet, as we get closer and closer to, the revelation, it will become more like the world of Atzilus. In the world of Atzilus, there is some sense of an existence, which we call Netzolim, emanated things, but at the same time, they feel the singularity which is within them. So it's an interesting, it's very subtle, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. It was articulated very, very well. And I think the point I was trying to bring out is that I believe, although none of what you said would change at all, I also believe from all that I've learned that there is a place of inter-inclusion and oneness of God when God comes through the finitude of us, where that oneness is the same oneness and unity that's being talked about here. Okay. That it's coming into the world through us, and we may not, or we may, I don't know, maybe if it will be a tzaddik, experience that singular oneness, but that singular oneness is definitely coming completely down to earth through us. So that was what I wanted to bring out. Because
right. My only point is right. You're right, but my only point is it's still in us.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay.
For sure.
Great. So I think that's a huge bechein, that while being an us, a yesh, we should be very aware of what we've been learning today. That they're at the same, this is this paradox, that while we are a yesh, at the same time, ein od milvado, there's nothing besides it, including us who feel ourselves as a yesh. So let's try bechein, so what? Try to get a little bit more in touch with the ein od, which is within us. Anything else? Morgen in the free, we'll be here again, or in the afternoon in Israel, in the late morning in Europe, wherever you are. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Toda Rabba.
What?